Welcome, everyone. Hello, hello, hello. Fabulous to see all of your smiling faces. Thank you so much for joining today's session, which I am very excited about. And judging by the hundreds of people who've signed up, you all are as well. Today is all about home ownership. How do you do it? What are the tricks and how can you afford it in the current market in Australia? We're very excited to have this discussion today. This is a session for you. So if you've got questions that you would like us to address throughout the next 30 minutes, please let us know in the chat and we will get to absolutely as many of those questions as we can. My name is Meggie Palmer and I'm the founder and CEO of a company called PepTalkHer. And we're on a mission to close the gender pay gap and also the gender home ownership gap. And I'm going to hand it over to Kirrah McClelland from Westpac to kick us off before I introduce to you our wonderful panelists.
Oh, thank you so much for the warm introduction, Meggie. Likewise, I'm so excited for this session. As you mentioned, I'm the Senior Manager of Women's Markets at Westpac and I run Ruby Connection. As many of you now know, Ruby is focused on discussing issues women are talking about and in particular, building financial confidence and creating the life you desire. So I'm thrilled to see so many of you on here today to dive deeper into home ownership. It's just such a thrill, honestly. And I know that a lot of you will have seen the scary statistic of women over 50 being the fastest growing population of homelessness. And we definitely want to see that we can put everything in place to avoid that. And home ownership is really one important step in setting your future self up for success. So please ask loads of questions of our experts today, remain inquisitive, and most importantly, take action to set yourself up for success. This community is here to support you and cheer you on, rest assured. So with that, I would like to thank our experts for joining us today, Cate, Jennifer, and Lucinda. Thanks for taking the time. And with that, I'll hand back to you, Meggie.
Thanks so much, Kirrah, and a big warm welcome to everyone joining us today for this fabulous Ruby Connection event, proudly supported by Westpac and hosted by myself and the team at PepTalkHer. We're delighted to be having this conversation with you today. Let me introduce to you our amazing experts who are going to impart their wisdom to you today. Cate, I might throw it to you to start with. You have a very impressive history with property. Your first one, I believe, you purchased when you were just 21.
Yep, very true. Thank you for having me join.
Yeah.
It's really special, and this is something that I feel very passionate about as well. So my quick little intro is that I'm a buyer's agent and I cover the Victorian market. I keep an eye on the national market. I've got a podcast and I've been doing this for 11 years now, and I feel very fortunate that I wake up every day to the job that I love.
We're going to have so many questions coming your way, Cate. Brace yourself. I can see everyone's face already. Send those questions our way. We can't wait to hear them. And Cate, just delighted to have you with us today. And Jennifer, such a treat to have you joining us here today as well. You specialize in property and real estate transactions to help people who are purchasing properties. Tell us a little bit more about your story.
Yes, so firstly, thank you so much for inviting me to this today. So my name's Jen Pham. I'm the property partner at MistryFallahi Lawyers. We are a boutique law firm situated in Sydney, and we provide property services to basically all states and territories except for the Northern Territory. And where I've derived most joy is assisting purchasers, whether they're first home buyers, whether they're, seasoned professionals or veterans, whatever the case is, in order to achieve their property goals. Because the whole process of buying a property can be quite scary, especially if you've never done it before. And there's a lot of things that we need to be cautious of, because you'll be quite surprised to find out actually that you have more consumer protection buying a fridge than you do buying a house, which is so counterintuitive, but that's just the way it is.
Okay, we're going to have to unpack that a little bit further. Just quickly, you've mentioned that. That's really interesting. What do you mean by, not as many protections? What does that exactly mean, Jennifer?
So when you buy a fridge, for example, you have protections under the Australian consumer law, which have where the fridge is under warranty. So if it breaks down, if there's a fault, you can return it to the manufacturer, you can get a refund, or you can get a replacement. Whereas when it comes to property, the situation is more best described as caveat emptor, which is buyer beware. So it is real, there is a lot of pressure and a lot of responsibility on the purchaser's shoulders to make sure that they're satisfied with the condition of the property, and they're fully aware of what they're getting themselves into. So while the vendor does have a duty to disclose certain things, for example, if there was a bad crime at the property, then they will have to actually disclose that. But for example, if the property has a bad termite infestation, or it has a big structural defect, there's actually no obligation to disclose that. And it would be up to the purchaser to do their due diligence, get the necessary inspection reports and things like that done, just to make sure they're aware of what they're getting themselves into.
Okay, that's super interesting. And let me know in the chat if you were already aware that that was the case. That's actually new information for me. So thank you, Jennifer. I so appreciate that. And last but by no means least, we have the wonderful Lucinda joining us as well from Westpac, she's a home finance manager. So she's going to be able to help us answer some queries that you may have on the financing space. Welcome, Lucinda. Such a treat to have you here as well.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to help you all. I'm pretty keen to get an understanding as to where your headspace may be in terms of how to get into the market. I'm happy to answer any questions as you'd like. We're all definitely here to help, so happy to go.
Awesome. And we might do a quick pop quiz. Let me know in the chat, do you own a home? And what is the reason that you've turned up today? Are you thinking about buying another property? Are you like me and considering buying your first property? Or are you just here to kind of test the waters and keep thinking about it? Let me know in the chat what the main reason for you attending today's session is. That will really help us to make sure that we can, tailor the content to help you. Cate, let's kick off the formal part of the discussion today. If you are thinking about buying a house, top 3 considerations, what should they be?
Wow. Well, the first one is making sure that financially you're ready to do so, because I see so many people hit the market before they've got things sorted. And you know how that goes. You'll spot something that you love in the window on the day that you haven't got the money for it. So the best advice that I can have is don't be afraid of getting your pre-approval in order and being able to hit the ground running, so that if the right property comes up, you're in a position to pounce on it, because there's nothing worse than missing out on something that tugs your heartstrings, and you'll just always have that sense of what could have been. Now, the next one is to have a plan before you go shopping. And a lot of people, have shades of grey in between getting finance ready and having a plan. But the best way to have a plan is to have a look on a search engine sold tab, not the for sale tab, but the sold tab, because you can see what the properties have actually sold for. And in a market that's this aggressive, I wouldn't go back to sales dating any further than 3 months ago. In fact, even 3 months at this pace is tending to give us the wrong kind of indication for likely selling price. And that's a tough one, but that's what I tell my clients as well when they're in that initial planning stage, to have a look at what has been selling. And if you're looking at an area and you have a dwelling type in mind and you can't see any recent sales that are matching your budget, what that means is that property might not exist in that location. All is not lost. You'll need to work out what your compromise is, and that might mean moving slightly further out, going to the next suburb, going for something smaller, or maybe on smaller land, or maybe a property that's not quite as renovated. So getting the search right is really important. And then the third one, I think, is being familiar with the process and the agents and the auction regime, so that you're not fresh to it. And if you start chatting to agents in the area that you're looking at, you will start to see, you'll get familiar with the process and you'll see some patterns, and there will be agents that are helpful. They're not all across the board unhelpful, but they're more helpful when they can see that you're ready to make a purchase decision and you know what you're looking for.
This is amazing advice. Thank you so much, Cate. I really appreciate that. And what's really interesting is we've got a real mixed bag of people joining the session today. And thank you for those of you who have popped in the chat your reason for joining today. If you've just joined, let me know, what would you love to learn in the half hour we have together today? We've got a lot of first home buyers. Hello to all of you. I'm right there with you. Obviously, I wish I'd bought ages ago, but I didn't. So, potentially the next best time could be could be tomorrow. It's hard to know in the current market. So we've got people here who are buying their first property, like me, and we've got people who are kind of sounding things out, and a couple of people looking for an investment property. So a couple of different scenarios, and congratulations to all of you for taking the time out to, you know, do this education piece. That's so important. And Lucinda, one thing I would love to know, Cate sort of talked us through 3 things you need to think about before you go out and start to look for the properties that are helpful for you. One thing she said was making sure you've got that pre-approval process. For people who've never done that before, I've not done this before, what are the steps that you look for as someone who works at a bank and who helps people support them through this process? What is helpful for you when people come to you and ask you to help them figure out what they can borrow? What do they need to have ready for you? I think you're on mute, Lucinda. I'll just get you to click unmute if that's okay. There we go. Perfect.
There we go, as always. Lovely question. So as we all know, just in terms of a pre-approval, essentially what it is, it's based on the information that you have provided to us. We'll do a bit of an assessment to get understanding as to what our borrowing power is and what banks really do want to know in terms of how much do we earn and what do we see in the future in terms of bonuses and things like that. Other than that as well, we want to look at what essentially your budget is as a person and what areas we want. Essentially, when we speak to a lender, we'll get a better understanding, and we don't want to overpromise ourselves. And that way, once you have a discussion with us, getting an understanding as to what your purchase price as well as your borrowing power, it allows you to get into that property market sooner rather than just waiting and waiting and waiting. So ask as many questions as you want, but as a bank, we just want to know what your current financial situation is as well as how our future looks like.
Okay, and in terms of like documents and stuff like that, do we need to have tax returns ready to give you? Have we got to have every single bank account we have in the entire world printed out? Like, do you need all of that for that first meeting, or?
Definitely not. We'd like to make sure our meeting is nice and simple. Essentially, we mainly just want to know, ideally, what do you have owing, as well as we do want to see our pay slips. Now, there are some scenarios where you are self-employed. Essentially, there is where we do require tax returns. However, if we've got our basic, full-time role, part-time role, casual role, we purely only just need pay slips, to be honest. Pay slips tell a big story, and that's what we're there to look at.
Yeah, okay, that's really good. It's nice to know that you need to have that information before you have that conversation. We've got a question that's come through, and I just want to jump on that before we continue on, Lucinda. What if you are self-employed or a freelancer, or what if you don't work for a big company and have those sort of 12 months of regular pay slips? Is that a deal breaker?
Not at all. Now, being self-employed as a bank, we know we don't have that regular and consistent income, which is why we look at our tax returns. And essentially is that we look at our consistency, which is why as a bank, we ask for our last 2 financial years. So throughout those 2 financial years, we don't simply just look at what goes into your account. We look at what's declared to the bank. So within our tax returns, it shows our total sales, hopefully it's a good amount as well. And from there is what was our notice of assessment. So absolutely fine if it's not consistent income, because that tax return tells us with the year that was, so not at specific months.
Okay, that's really helpful. I appreciate you filling us in, and thank you to the person who sent me that question through on a direct message as well. Kim from our team is putting some really interesting links in the chat that you might want to save for later. There's a great rent versus buy calculator that she's just popped in. So that's good and a bit of fun actually to play around with it. There's one question that is standing out above everything else, and I'm going to flag this question and we're going to come back to it. Is the market too hot, and is it a good time to buy or not? This is not a financial advice session. We can't give you specific personalized advice, but we can talk in general terms. So I'm going to ask our experts their opinion in just a moment. But before I do that, Jennifer, we've had some questions coming through, and I appreciate Cate and Lucinda telling us what we need to do when we look for a property, and then when we figure out, how to get the finances. What about the process? It's kind of, honestly, it freaks me out a little bit. Like the concept of going to an auction and having to have those paddles, and what if I say the wrong thing, and what things do I have to sign? And we've had a great question coming through. Someone handles the communication because their partner travels, and they kind of find it tough sometimes to do all this negotiating on their own. What's your advice? Because you live and breathe this every day, don't you?
Yes, I do. So like, even though I primarily focus on like reviewing the contracts and providing advice on the next steps, I also do provide some guidance on how, I guess, to have dealings with, I guess, with sales agents. So it's sort of interesting to hear that they're like, this person has seen a distinct change between when they say they're like, if they're speaking and then they're just purchasing by themselves and then they mention their partner. What I would probably suggest is from the get-go, just to say that, look, I am looking to purchase, this property with my partner, and, depending on how comfortable, they feel, they may wish to engage like the services of like a buyer's advocate or a buyer's agent like Cate, who can definitely do all of that negotiation, all of that discussion for them, so that they don't actually have to deal with estate agents. Because unfortunately, more often than not, while we'd like to think that they do help us, sometimes they can end up being quite pushy. And I'm sure Cate has so many stories of this that she can share with us.
Yeah, well, Cate, do you want to talk us through that? Because we've actually had a few people sending me messages saying that they feel like they get mansplained quite a lot when they go to auctions or inspections or have conversations. And that would not happen with any of our fabulous experts today. But Cate, is that a trend that you hear in the industry?
Look, sometimes I do, but there's plenty of female agents out there that can make life tough for consumers as well. I think, real estate agents themselves are a tricky set of beasts to navigate if you're not used to that side of, that world. And bear in mind, stepping into their shoes and understanding a little bit about where they're coming from is probably a really good thing to retrospectively do. And I can share with you now a little bit of information about agents that will give us a better appreciation of why they do what they do and what they're good at and what they're terrible at. First and foremost, though, the selling agent works for the vendor. And there are plenty of selling agents that are really good at dealing with buyers. But at the end of the day, their fiduciary duty is to their vendor. And some of them will give the buyer the impression that they're buddies with them, and then they'll, burn them at the end, or create a competitive situation that just feels awful that you weren't anticipating. But they work for the vendor. You can certainly you can disarm them, or you can arm yourself really effectively. And some of the common things that agents do that upset consumers is when they talk in riddles about a price, or when they're really sketchy about value, or they've got a quote range that's wrong and the resultant price flies outside of that. And the times that I deal with agents, in 99.9% of situations, I get the truth about the price, the reserve, sometimes why they're selling, or what I need to understand that could make my offer stronger. So what settlement terms they'd like, or if there are any circumstances that will help me package the offer in a way that's really attractive to the vendor. And I get that information pretty easily, but that's because I know how to talk to them. I know how to field their responses and get the truth out of them. And sometimes it's the questions that you ask as well. If you ask a closed question where the agent's backed into a corner and it's yes or no, you'll probably have a better chance of getting the information you need. But also, and I think the main tip that I've got when it comes to dealing with agents is they will open up to you if they know that you're purchase ready, you know what you're talking about, you've got some context around the questions you're asking. So if you're asking an agent to tell you what a property is really worth, they'll be reluctant to do that for a few reasons. They want to keep the mystique up and underquote it and have lots of people rock up. Right, but also they're quite afraid to put their own price tag out there in case they're wrong. They don't want to burn the campaign and lose the buyer, but they don't want to lie to you either. So the best way that I talk to agents about price is being armed with comparable sales. So if I'm looking at something in a particular street and I know something in the next street that was similar, sold 2 months ago, I will say to the agent, how do you think this one compares to your one? Open question, and they'll be able to tell you, similar, inferior, superior.
Okay, this is really good advice. I hope you're all jotting down notes. I'm mentally taking lots of notes. I want to come back to the question that we're getting, the most in the chat, which is what's going to happen to the market? What I can tell you is what Westpac is predicting, right? So we do know that the housing market is booming. There's no question, and prices have gone up 8.5% compared to pre-COVID levels, right? Westpac and their amazing team are predicting further growth this year and indeed into 2022 as well. So they're actually predicting a total of 15% to the end of this year with a further 5% in 2022. Now, these are predictions, but it's interesting when you look at what the economists are saying. Lucinda, is this a question you're getting a lot when people are coming into you to figure out how much they can borrow, and if it's an investment, how much rent they'll get versus the mortgage? Do they ask you that a lot as well? Like what's going to happen to prices?
Look, they definitely do. And I definitely echo what you said in terms of we do predict the growth. However, as we see with the current market, it just changes way too often to get to understand as to how our future does look like. However, when a client does ask me a question like that, I just purely say, why don't we just look at now? Let's look at what we're looking at now. When are we wanting to buy? If it's going to be within the next 3 months, we'll look at the current growth and the current sales that are currently happening. Whereas if we're looking at something within the next 6 to 12 months, we might just put a hold on the home buying journey and wait a little bit, only because if the market does seem to change, then we can reevaluate our position, whether we may have more deposit to get that exact same house that just might be a little bit longer, or, have we had a pay rise to allow us to achieve that, purchase price, even if it does increase. So it's definitely something that does come up a lot. The answer is hard to tell. However, we always look at what we currently, what our current market is. Everything is becoming expensive. That way, that's why when we do look at our borrowing power, we do look at our purchase price, at least when you're in the market, you know what you're looking for, and that's your negotiating power there as well.
And I just want to stay with you for one more question, Lucinda, if that's okay. And we are getting so many questions through. I never do this. We may actually go a little bit over time because we are getting so many questions. So keep sending them through. Thank you. They're very interesting and I will get to them. Lucinda, a question that I keep getting asked in the chat, for people who are looking at buying a property as an investment or for something that they may want to rent in future, they want to know, is this something that the banks kind of weigh up? Like how much rent do you need to get as a percentage of the property price in order for banks to consider loaning on that property?
Great question. So essentially, there is no minimum. However, as an investor, you do want to look at the rental yield for yourself, especially whether you're considering more as a positively geared property rather than our negatively geared property. Now, essentially, we all want a high returning property. And yes, as a bank, we do take that into account in terms of our serviceability. Now, of course, when we're buying a house and we're buying a unit, that rental income may be different. It is definitely something that we look at. However, in terms of the yield, obviously, the higher the yield, the better rental return we have, the better serviceability, of course, as well. So it really depends on the current market and the areas that you do look at.
Okay, so once we've identified all of those numbers, once we've spoken to our bank and we've had the loan approved, and let's assume that we've had great success, the offer has been accepted, what then happens, Jennifer? Like, I just want people to feel very prepared. What happens at settlement? What should they expect?
Yeah, so the first thing is, if you've had your offer accepted, congratulations, because that is very, very exciting times ahead. The best advice that I can give is to ask either your solicitor or a conveyancer, so someone like me or like another conveyancer, to review the contract for you, because the contract is essentially the entire terms of the arrangement, and there can be some terms in there which you can get caught out upon, and it's not ideal. So the biggest one that we see, and especially as we come up to Christmas, and unfortunately as things take a little bit longer sometimes, and we may potentially need to request more time, by doing that, we would put ourselves in a position of being in breach of contract, and the vendor can request that we pay more money to them by way of penalties. So in this particular case, the best thing to do is to ask someone to review the contract for you and to provide you with advice on the terms, and just to make sure that you're comfortable with the legal obligation that you're taking on. The biggest one is just being sure that you are completely ready to purchase the property from a financial perspective, as Lucinda has said, and you're happy with all of the due diligence and all of the inspection reports that you've done. And, worst case scenario, if things don't go through, you'll end up losing up to 10% of the purchase price to the vendor, which is not ideal. So given what property prices are now, 10% is going to take a very, very long time to recover. So it's best just to have someone read the contract. And if there are any changes or any terms that you'd like to add in, so for example, normally settlement is 42 days from signing of contract. You might say, oh, Jen, from today, that's the 13th of December, you might say to me, Jen, I'm going on Christmas holiday. I don't want to deal with this until January. So this is an example of some of the terms in the contract that we would need to finalize and have agreed to, because the worst case scenario is if we go in and then we say to the vendor, oh, we can't settle on the 13th of December. Then in that circumstance, they'll say, we can extend settlement, but you're going to have to pay us a little bit more money. And I guess how I work, and part of it could be because I'm also Asian, is that if I don't have to pay money, or if there's a situation where we can avoid that, then that is much preferable. So the first thing is to just have the contract reviewed, have the contract terms finalized, and then everything else, like your solicitor or conveyancer, will be able to take care of.
And for people who want to know nuts and bolts, exactly what does a conveyancer do? They basically walk you through this legal process. Is that right, Jennifer, if I had to distill it super quickly?
Yep, it is. So a conveyancer will provide you advice on the process, and they will also do the paperwork for you. So we're a solicitor, so I'm a solicitor, and how we differ is that we can actually provide legal advice on the terms of the contract, and we can also be there for you if things go pear-shaped, because unfortunately, I do see it quite a bit in practice, which is people engage a conveyancer. What happens is something goes completely pear-shaped. The conveyancer just says, look, I can't help you now. You need to seek your own legal advice. So that's mainly the difference between us.
Okay, super helpful. Really appreciate that, Jennifer. Do keep your questions coming. Thank you so much for all of them. We're going to get to as many as we can. Cate, this is a question that I think you'll find interesting. And Lucinda, you might have some thoughts on this as well. Is there a standard, like if I'm a seller and an agent, let's say the house price is 100,000, just for easy numbers. Is it normal that I would list it at 100,000, but I would really accept 95? Is there like a 5% either way that they list it under or over? Is that true, or is that just a rumor?
It's not a rumor. It's just a really bad rule of thumb, because it comes down to the type of the campaign and the type of agent and vendor and market, and also market conditions that you're navigating. A seller's market, a balanced market, a buyer's market, all very, very different. Metro, regional, country, very different. And then you've got different classes of property, commercial, industrial, residential, off the plan. I don't think anyone applying a rule of thumb stretch is making a sound decision, because you could be making a terrible mistake. And I'll give you a few examples. If it's a private sale and you're really wanting $100,000, but you'd be happy with 95, it depends on your circumstances, what is going on in the market, what the agent's telling you, what the buyers are used to. You might list it for 90,000 plus and hope that you get a frenzy of buyers coming on, and then they fight over it and you have like a little mini auction, and all of a sudden you've got 110. There's lots of different styles of selling and pricing that are adopted across our nation. I can go into the country markets, well, let's say Ballarat Bendigo, for example, and they've got a property listed 370 to 390. If it's a brand new listing, that vendor might be hoping for 380, and they've set the goalposts accordingly. If it's an old listing and they're really desperate to sell it, they might be happy with 360. And if it's a brand new listing and the agent has had 20 phone calls in the last 24 hours, they might be telling the vendor to hold out for 400,000. So you can't apply that logic. And auctions are another beast indeed. So we can cover that off at any time that you tell me to, Meggie. But when it comes to pricing, don't ever make that assumption. The best thing that you can do is have a look at the sold tab, do your own comparable sales analysis. Doesn't take that long. Even if it takes you 3 hours, people spend more time researching a holiday or a pair of jeans than a property sometimes. If you do your own comparable sales, you'll have a much better idea of what it's really worth.
Such great advice, Cate. And I know that we are at time. I'm going to continue because I've got about 1,000 questions to get to, but let me know in the chat, would you like us to run another session around house prices, around investing, around dealing with auctions? Just put a yes, please, in the chat so that I can know. And Kirrah and I will work to, oh my gosh, okay, there we go. We will work to it as soon as possible.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's what a time to be trying to buy. Everyone wants to know whether they should wait, what's going on. So, and it's, I mean, Cate, this is so interesting. I always thought you should lowball. Maybe that's something that I was taught as a child. Obviously, very different in the current market. Lucinda, when you think about buying, I mean, it's a good time to buy in the sense that interest rates are pretty low, right? But can you talk us through, like, what are some of the, I guess, things that people need to be aware of if interest rates rise? If, for example, you're on a variable rate, can you talk us through how fixed and variable differ, just so that people have that context when they're making that decision?
Absolutely. And just so we're all aware, I'm sure at one stage, a lot of our rates were under 2%. Now I call them COVID rates. Now the reason why I call them COVID rates is that based on the current standard rate, Westpac actually added additional buffer rates to help our first home buyers and our investors. Now, essentially, the reason why we actually wanted to do that is give the support and secure a great rate for a long term. That's essentially our fixed rate. So with our fixed rate, you lock it in from 1 to 5 years at a certain rate, and that gives you that security that from now to whichever period, we know our rate isn't going to change. Pretty much the biggest difference when we compare it to our variable rate. Now, as a bank, we do our due diligence, and we do add a bit of a buffer on our rates in terms of assessments. So our rates are low, but we do increase it when we come to look at our borrowing power. So we don't ever want our clients to have that worry, oh, that interest rate increase, oh, my repayments are going to increase. As a bank, we've already factored that in for us. So in terms of how the cycle goes, the variable rate does tend, the whole purpose of it, it can increase, it can decrease at any stage, and it does change your repayments. Opposed to fixed, we know that's secured no matter how up or down the rates go.
That's really helpful, and I appreciate that. And thank you to everyone for your feedback in the chat. I expect that Kirrah is right. We might be doing a few sessions on this in the coming months. So stay tuned on your emails for this. I want to be conscious and respectful of your time because I know it's a Friday and I know you've got places to be, cocktails to drink, coffees to have, whatever it is, kids to pick up from school soon. So thank you for spending your Friday lunchtime with us. We really appreciate you. But a huge thank you also to Jennifer, Cate, and Lucinda. I've learnt a lot. I really hope you have too. For those of you who are more advanced in your property journey, we are going to put on another session. So watch this space for more information on that. Kirrah, I think we should get an auctioneer on. I think that'd be really interesting. Hear from them as well, right? That'd be fun.
Absolutely. There's nothing more terrifying than an auction. I saw that in the chat. That sounds great.
Yeah, so we will be, because it's a really important topic. It's something that we're very passionate about because we know that there's more barriers for women when it comes to purchasing homes because of things like the gender pay gap, because of some of the discrimination that some of you mentioned in the chat as well. So plenty more conversations to come on this. We will be sending you a recording and a link to our fabulous speakers' websites and LinkedIn so you can connect with them. Those links are in the chat as well. If you want to add them on LinkedIn now, if you need a conveyancer, if you need a banker, if you need a buyer's agent, please do connect with Jennifer, Cate, and Lucinda. They are excellent humans. And so we hope that all of you have success in your home buying journey. Please keep us posted. There are so many resources on the Ruby Connection website. We've popped those links in the chat. If you miss them, don't worry. We're going to email them to you as well. So keep an eye out for that in the next 24 hours. The calculator is really good. There's a checklist that literally talks you through everything. So it keeps it super simple, step by step by step. So we are there to support you on this journey. There's more resources on the Ruby Connection website as well, supported by Westpac. So thank you again to them for putting on this session. We hope you've learned something. Let me know in the chat what your biggest takeaway is, and please do keep us posted with your home buying journey. A huge thank you again to Jennifer, Cate, Lucinda, and Kirrah and Felicity for supporting this session, and we will see you all at the next one. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.